Greetings sailors and welcome back to one of my own Warships replays, which is a bit of a rare sight these days, but I didn't have any viewer ones to hand or Patreon ones, and so this seemed like a decent fit because it's a rather fun bottom tier game I had in the Gremyaschy. Nothing too spectacular, but it was certainly enjoyable to play, and the Gremyaschy itself is still a reasonably enjoyable ship at Tier 5. In fact, it remains one of the better Tier 5 premium destroyers overall. It's definitely not the wee devil it used to be when it was a not even a smoke firing monster, invisible firing monster. It could way back in the old days, and I'm sure a lot of you maybe haven't been playing that long, but yeah, there was a time in this game's history when firing whilst invisible, just straight up invisible, was a thing in destroyers. You could get your firing range to be longer than your detectability whilst firing range, and this thing was particularly nasty. It was one of the OG premiums. I think it was one of the pre-order ships, and it was kind of OP at the time just because of that, but not so much these days. It's still decent though. The main downside it has is that it's got a really horrendous 30 odd second turret traverse, which is kind of like cruiser length, but in all other regards it's pretty decent. You've got very good speed for tier 5, not the best but still pretty good. You have those Soviet 130mm guns with an okay rate of fire. You also have quite good handling. And probably the best thing overall is the stealth, which is 6.1 kilometers. That's pretty decent for a tier 6 destroyer. There's obviously stuff at tier 5 even. There's obviously stuff that's better at tier 5, but they tend to have weak guns, shorter range torpedoes, etc, etc, etc. Talking of the torps, they hit very nicely. You've got 2 triple tubes, but they do have a rather slow speed. I think it's like 50 something knots, 55 knots, something like that. Not especially fast. But if you're playing these kind of mid-tier games, although technically this is mid to high tier games, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. You still can get a decent number of hits just because players are maybe a little bit less aware. I will freely admit I have way more fun here at the mid-tiers than playing high tier games. I can still play high tier games. I've still played a pretty decent number of high tier games, but it's just not as enjoyable generally. Although I think a big part of that is that quite a lot of the time I'm playing solo, and so obviously being solo as opposed to being in a division does make a fairly big difference as to your playing experience. I did want to bring up that, I mean, I have kind of said that I would be not doing my own replays anymore and just sticking with your replays, but that's kind of not really given me enough replays to work with, although I still could go and just pluck random replays from the replays portal site, I suppose. That's still an option, but it isn't like those do any better in terms of viewer numbers, so yeah, I've decided to, I guess, bend my own rule a bit and use one of my own, but it's not going to be a super regular thing. I'm just going to save it for those games that are actually pretty decent, because, you know, I'm still a bit mad at wargaming and all that. That hasn't really gone away anywhere. There was supposed to be at least doing something with reforms of the CC program in terms of like outlines and whatever towards the end of last month, and I don't think they've announced anything as regards that. I think from the wording it was supposed to be kind of like an internal thing, but it also would have been good if maybe they'd given some hints as to what's going on behind the scenes. So we're now into early October and there's still no public sign of what's going on with that, but maybe we'll hear something at some point. There's also been lots of other news, but you know, we're saving that for the podcast. The next, the podcast this week is going to be a very, very, very busy one indeed. The Oklahoma was definitely the primary target for me there, by the way, just because, you know, Oklahoma secondaries, kind of nasty if you want to get in close. But the Texas I'm not nearly so worried about, and also they are ignoring me. This has been a game with a lot of gifts, basically, a lot of freebies so far. That initial kill was really nice, certainly not a guarantee, but yeah, finishing off the T-22, getting the Oklahoma, and now I'm going to get to ninja this Texas as well. I really don't know why the Texas and the Oklahoma pushed in like that. I don't even think they were divisioned up together. They just kind of blundered into quite a lot of our team, and it went rather predictably. So, you know, don't look a gift battleship in the mouth. That's a saying, right? So all that's left between me and getting this cap is this Alba, and everything else is on the other side, where despite having more numbers, it looks like we have been able to cap. So this wasn't the hardest enemy team to face, although we're still going to lose some ships. You know, we've only lost 3 and they've lost twice as many, but we are still going to lose some. This is far from over yet. This definitely wasn't a particularly competitive match, though. I mean, despite the fact that we are going to lose more of our ships, the enemy team's never really going to recover score-wise. It's definitely not one of those games where they make a dramatic comeback. So, torpedoes out, but I am about to get spotted, and I have smoke ready, although I need to be in a better position to use that smoke. So there we go, AP shells, which if they had AP loaded for something else would be understandable, but presumably they're going to fire HE at me at this point. Nope, okay, in which case I don't think I'm going to need that smoke. Those 14-inch Alba shells, I mean, yes, it only has 6 of them, but it's like a, what, a 10, 11 second reload? It's one of the best reloads of a heavy cruiser. It just doesn't have a particularly heavy broadside. So it always feels a bit underwhelming to me for that reason, but it's still not a bad ship. But if you're going to fire AP at a destroyer, then you're really not going to do very much with it, as this Alba is finding out. So yeah, really at this point I am just distracting this Alba while all of the rest of the team that was in the A-cap is pulling into view, and they are not going to last very much longer at all. It would be nice if I could get this kill, that would be a Kraken, but given that they're broadside, well, I would have to kind of get lucky here, because I would need a fair few more shots to actually do anything. And as it is the König that gets the kill. So that leaves that cap entirely free and clear to be grabbed. We're still a good, what, 350 points ahead, nearly 400 points. So yeah, there's no danger of the enemy team coming back from this one at this point. We would have to spectacularly throw it away. As I said, we've lost some more ships. We basically lost the ships that were over on this flank, and I think their hider has been doing a reasonably good job, but it's not really been enough to stem the tide. And so it's just a matter of seeing if I can pick up that Kraken, because it would be nice. Now, I did have another Tier 5 Destroyer Kraken game very recently, and I actually considered using that one instead, but it was a T-22, it was top tier, and there was no carriers, which by definition there would have to be no carriers if it was top tier, although I suppose someone could have failed divisioned in with a Tier 4 carrier. That is theoretically possible. But yeah, I was able to use the very good stealth and the hydro to excellent effect, and it almost didn't feel fair. It's funny because when it came out, the T-22 was quite widely regarded as being one of the worst Tier 5 destroyers and a low point of the line overall, and with the, what was it, the stealth and I think the torpedo range got buffed. I can't remember exactly what it was. Was it the addition of hydro? I can't remember if it originally did have hydro, but it's a far better ship these days. It is actually one of my guilty pleasures almost at Tier 5, but just because between the stealth and the hydro it feels so capable. And it has, again, got a quite a nice torpedo range. I think it's either 7.5 or 8. Same as this. So, yeah, it's a really nice little ship, and it can be downright dirty if you get into that situation when you're top tier. So I figured I'd use this replay instead, because, you know, at least it has some semblance of challenge with being in a Tier 7 game. So that was the Kraken anyway. It just remains to take out this Nagato and possibly the Hider, but we are very close to winning this on points. And the Hider is high health. So the chances are that we won't get to do it. I'm kind of glad that I've run into the Hider last of all, because getting into a gunfight with a Hider with this thing, with these guns, with this turret traverse, I mean, this thing can so easily outturn its own turrets. It really can. The rudder response is nice. It's got a nice tight turning circle and absolutely god-awful turret traverse to go with all that. So yeah, this thing really does require a bit of planning to keep your turrets where you want them to be, and sometimes getting the most out of your firepower means taking slightly awkward angles in order to actually keep all the turrets where you want them. Anyway, no kill on that Hider. They managed to survive when the rest of their team did not, but yeah, double strike and a Kraken out of not a double strike, dev strike, even 2 dev strikes and a Kraken. So overall that was quite a nice round. 2,000, nearly 2,200 base XP, which was decently far ahead of the rest of the team. And some of the kills I did definitely hoover up a bit, but that damage isn't bad for being bottom tier in tier 5, and it just goes to show that the Gremy is still a pretty capable ship for being a tier 5 destroyer, because some of them struggle. Some of them really do, either in terms of detection radius or short torpedo range or weak firepower. Some of them are particularly vulnerable to AA, but the Gremy actually is not bad in that regard either, at least for a tier 5 destroyer. So that is it for this replay. You can let me know your thoughts down in the comments section as always. Otherwise you can do all the other usual things, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.